Along with the Panama Canal, Donald Trump said the US owning and controlling Greenland was an absolute necessity. Here's his former National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, on why.
Greenland is a highway from the Arctic all the way to North America to the United States. It's strategically very important to the Arctic, which is going to be the critical battleground of the future, because as the climate gets warmer, the Arctic is going to be a pathway that maybe it cuts down on the usage of the Panama Canal. And the Russians and Chinese are all over the Arctic. Denmark is now on the front lines of the war against Russia and China. They're like the Baltic states, they're like Poland, because of their vast territory in Greenland. And so they've got to defend Greenland. And if they can't defend it, we're going to have to, and we're not going to do it for free.
What are the implications for Greenland, great power rivalry in the Arctic, and global security? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Joining us today are Eugene Chasovsky, New Lines Institute Analytical Development and Training Senior Director, Raymond Song, Prospect Foundation Vice President, and Eric Boomer Chang, Asia Pacific Peace Research Institute Director of Technology and Strategy. A very warm welcome to all of you on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks.
Greenland is the world's largest island, spanning 2 million square kilometers and strategically located between the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. It sits on the doorstep of a region holding an estimated 1/5 of the world's untapped oil and natural gas. Under the ice of Greenland is the 8th largest reserve of rare earth metals. At the same time, the Arctic provides the shortest distance between Russia and North America. On top of that, the Arctic is warming 3 times faster than the rest of the world, with the Pentagon saying ice-free summers may be possible by 2030. This increases the viability of the world's newest shipping routes. To the right of this map, you can see the Northern Sea Route, which runs along the Russian coast. China is working with Russia to develop Beijing's Polar Silk Route along this route to avoid choke points at the Suez Canal and the Malacca Strait. To the left is the Northwest Passage, which runs along Canada's coast. Now, Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, led by Prime Minister Mute Ejede. However, Copenhagen controls Greenland's foreign and defense policies and provides its economy with an annual subsidy of more than $500 million or 20% of its GDP, according to the US Department of Commerce. On January 10th, Denmark's defense minister repeated his remarks that his country has not done enough for Greenland's defense. Take a look.
Fordi jeg vil gerne sige fuldstændig ærligt i aften, vi har jo forsømt igennem mange år at lave de nødvendige investeringer i vores skibe, i de fly, der skal være med til at overvåge vores kongedømme. Og det er så det, som vi nu prøver at gøre noget ved. Det håber jeg, vi kan lave en aftale med Folketingets partier om her i løbet af kort tid.
Eugene, so they're saying that they've neglected for many years the defense of Greenland. What are the risks of doing that, or continuing to do that?
Right. So I think that, obviously neglecting the risks of defending Greenland, we're seeing a shifting climate and this new route opening up, so to speak, in the Arctic. So that entails everything from shipping lines to access to resources. And we've seen an increased great power competition over this region, including from the likes of China, Russia, and other players as well. So if you're not prepared to compete in this region, then you're at risk of falling backwards. And as we're going to see more access open up, this is a very important area to show influence over and to have a leg up, so to speak, over both adversaries, but also potential partners and allies.
And so, Raymond, I think Eugene hinted there about the urgency, perhaps. Do you think that is mostly at the heart of why it's such an urgent issue for Trump, because of the climate change?
I think the incoming Trump administration has been transparent on the aims, strategic rationales behind its ambition about taking control over Greenland, which include about controlling of the maybe future crucial sea lanes connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic, crossing the Arctic seas, and also about the competition about resources, including oil, gas, and the rare earth deposit, which are all very well. But how do we characterize the situation is the question. Do you see this as a strategic competition between great powers, or a defense that will be integratedly connected to national security? That's the question. So the allegation about the not sufficient contributions being paid to defense on the part of NATO by Denmark of Greenland. It's a leap of rationales or reasonings behind all those talks. So, of course, this at least it's a competition, geographic competition between great powers.
And Boomer, if you can help us sort of get to grips with why does not defending Greenland in particular pose risks to the US in particular, so the national security?
So like both guests mentioned, there's kind of the two things. One is the resources from Greenland, also the shipping routes. So if US doesn't actually jostle, it seems like that's what the power, Russia, China, US, are jostling for position and be able to actually get both the either defending or be on the offense on shipping lane, which would be national security, because if a shorter route from North America to Asia and Europe, significantly, then it poses definitely great risks for US, both militarily and also economically.
So Eugene, let's get into the military aspect of it, because shipping, climate change, perhaps economic security as well as national security if those lines or that trade is blocked. But for example, what's the significance of Thule military base and Pitufik space station?
Right. So I think that we've already...
Space base.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've seen that it shows that the U.S. has already had an interest. This didn't just come from Trump's recent comments, that Greenland has always posed, especially in the post-World War II era, a strategic interest to the U.S. Right now, this serves as largely as a radar station to be able to identify any potential emerging threats. Back in the Cold War era, it was any potential Soviet thrust, going through the Arctic region. But now that we're seeing climate change and this area opening up, not only for existing countries that are active in this region like Russia, but also China, which we know is trying to basically expand its influence, expand shipping lanes, things of that nature. So this military, these types of assets, both in terms of trying to monitor any activities that are happening, over on sea, but also in space as well. It will be an important warning of sorts.
Yeah, because there's a ballistic missile early warning system based there, obviously. And in terms of the assets there from perhaps Russia, what's the significance of Russia's nuclear submarines being in the Arctic?
Right, so Russia is known to be kind of the most militarized player in this region. There's several bases dotting the Arctic coast of Russia, and yes, they have plenty of assets, including nuclear submarines and others that they could be using, to play a spoiler role potentially. We've seen obviously Russia's activities span many different theaters, most notably Ukraine, but also in the Middle East. And so the fact that Russia and China have been increasing their security collaboration in different theaters certainly points to the Arctic as being one of those that could see a lot more activity, whether that be from nuclear submarines or other forms of vessels. So certainly this is something that the U.S. wants to get ahead of as the Trump administration comes into power.
Yeah, we know that Putin has also tested hypersonic weapons by flying them over the Arctic. CBC, Canadian Broadcasting, says that in the Arctic Circle, Russia has 57 military bases compared with NATO's only 32. Yeah. There's a big discrepancy there. And yet, in history, if you can help to explain for us, why was it that the US positioned the base on Greenland at Thule?
Right. One of the reasons is the control of the access to the North Atlantic from north, especially when the melting of the ice makes the navigation more possible in the future through the Arctic. And of course, that's also given the interest about the key, actually two sea lanes, northwest and northeastern sea lanes, and also about the whether it's easy to detect the activity of nuclear power submarines under the waters through those ice-covered seas. And also, so the defense, from the defense point of view, it's the how do you invest in the military installations and defense systems in those areas to secure that threats will not be occurred from the north, which will be of more security concern in the future.
Okay, now despite being 900 miles from the Arctic Circle, China has audaciously declared itself a, quote, near-Arctic state, making the claim in its 2018 Arctic policy. Earlier in 2013, China became an observer of the Arctic Council, whose members are the US, Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. According to the US's 2022 National Strategy for the Arctic region, over the past decade, the PRC has, quote, doubled its investments with a focus on critical mineral extraction, expanded its scientific activities, and used these scientific engagements to conduct dual-use research with intelligence or military applications in the Arctic. However, China's attempts to gain a presence on Greenland appear to have been stymied. Here are a few Chinese projects terminated or put on ice: Canasut uranium mining project, Ishua iron ore mining project, Newark and Ilulissat airports, and the purchase of Granadal Danish Naval Station. Now, of interest, China Communications Construction Company is heavily involved in the Panama Canal infrastructure projects. Now, one place where China has established a footing in the region is on the Norwegian island group of Svalbard. At the heart of Beijing's Arctic strategy lies the Yellow River Station in Ny-Ålesund, established in 2003. This research facility focuses on climate change and glaciology and serves as China's eyes and ears in the Arctic. In 2023, China placed acoustic listening buoys in the North Sea, ramping up its research activities at Ny-Ålesund. However, in July 2024, Norway blocked the sale of Shore Fjord, a 60 square kilometre property in Svalbard listed for $326 million US. Now, we also must say that Taiwan has also established its first Arctic research station on Svalbard, also in 2023. Raymond, how significant has Svalbard, this group of islands, been for China and Russia to gain a foothold in the Arctic?
Right. One of the reasons is the establishment of data collecting or information collecting bases like the radar station or even laser station. The information gathered thus will be useful for example, for adjust the missile trajectory or to use for the satellite calibration. So one of the is the information. The second one is due to the very special international status of Spielberg or Svalbard, because under the 1920s Svalbard Treaty, that Norway is recognized to own the sovereignty over Svalbard, but on the condition of that there's no naval bases, fortification, or there's no use of for military purposes will be allowed on that.
Right.
But the question is about the borderline, whether those collection information system will be viewed as a military nature or not.
So what's your assessment then of the inroads made by China let's talk about Svalbard or Greenland? Is it a high level of engagement, or is it actually lower than what we might think?
Right. So we've certainly seen China try to make a lot of different inroads, both economically, but as we've talked about, that can often have security dimensions to it. But we've also seen, as we've talked about already, some pushback to China's efforts. For example, the attempts to acquire some of those airports in Greenland, which was then basically rebuffed essentially, and then the U.S. and Denmark both stepped in. Similar, we've seen some more recent developments when it comes to critical minerals access. So clearly, China has put in a lot of effort. They're leveraging all of their experience that they've done through the Belt and Road Initiative, and now trying to apply this to this kind of Arctic route, so to speak. And I think that, from the standpoint of Greenland, certainly they had initially agreed to several of these agreements, only then to have that essentially reversed once the U.S. and some of the European countries stepped in. So from Greenland's perspective, there's much to be gained, and it doesn't hurt to be courted by multiple players. But I think China has seen that if it acts too assertively, there will be some pushback, whether that's in Greenland or elsewhere in the Arctic as well.
Yeah, and we should say that actually with the mining companies, it appears that it was Greenland itself not wishing to continue to do the mining, perhaps, as opposed to, say, the US or Denmark stepping in there. Is that your understanding?
Sure, yeah, and I mean, there's different conditions for every single project, but I think given the experience that we've seen in recent years, Greenland perhaps was, anticipating received the message, so to speak. But again, I mean, it can be beneficial from the standpoint of Greenland. There's, with that access to resources, and they want to make sure that they do it in a way that, benefits the population. But yes, I think that the message has been received that this is an area, the extent to which China pushes here is going to be met with some kind of counter actions. I think Trump, leveraging the threat of tariffs, for example, other forms of economic pressure. We'll see how that actually gets implemented, but this is something that the U.S. certainly will be pushing against.
Yeah, and Raymond, we heard in the soundbite at the beginning of the show, Robert O'Brien talking about we will defend Greenland, but not for free.
I think the root cause basis question is whether the view ascribed by the Trump administration to the importance or strategic significance of Greenland is ascribed to by either Denmark or the Greenlanders, whether they wish their territory to be used like that, or to be a focal point of strategic competition between great powers, or whether they want to preserve the status quo and not to be exploited, no less, no more mineral extractions, not to be part of the strategic competition. That's their sovereign rights to decide. So the question of the Trump's administration's reiteration is the question about whether there's some aspect of respect for the wishes of the Greenlanders and whether there's other means to purchase or to cooperate for defense or to take get involved in controlling the significant security aspects or even to take ownership. But I think the root cause is the wishes of the Greenlanders has to be respected.
Yes. So following Trump's remarks about controlling Greenland, the island's Prime Minister, Mute Ayeda, says the country is moving toward independence. He said he's ready to talk to Trump, but warned that his people do not want to be Danes or Americans. They want to be Greenlanders. Outgoing US Ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, was asked in this Wall Street Journal interview this.
Now, if you're sitting here in Beijing and you're seeing the rhetoric about Canada, about Greenland, does it make it more difficult as the US government to go to China and say we need to make sure that we respect sovereignty in the South China Sea or around the periphery of China? Does it make that harder?
The argument we made back 3 years ago when Putin invaded Ukraine is that countries' borders are sacrosanct, that sovereignty is sacrosanct. And so that's a fundamental building block of the stable, successful world that we had a lot of responsibility for building, and every single American president has honored.
Raymond, as a Taiwanese and living in Taiwan, what did you feel anything when you heard those comments about possibly not ruling out force?
I sense a deep uneasiness about in the Greenlanders' mind and Denmark's mind, whether the characterization given to Greenland is a bit concerning. They don't want to play in the focal point of the strategic competition, but the competition is at their doorstep. So on that level, we have tremendous sympathy with Greenlanders because we are also living in the very, very sensitive area of geopolitical tensions. But we don't want to be on that focal point, but there's no choice. It's a part of the fact of life. So that's the dilemma between this question. How do you proceed? Whether you agree with Trump's administration characterization of the problem, this national security defense problem. And I don't think everybody will agree.
His argument is it's not just national security for the US, but it's actually for the world,
Yes, but maybe the Greenlanders will want to preserve their very pristine lifestyle.
So. Eugene, what are the practical differences for the US dealing with either Greenland under Denmark or Greenland as an independent Greenland?
Right, so that will depend obviously on how the situation unfolds. I think largely speaking, if you're looking at it from a strategic perspective, and I largely agree with what Raymond and Boomer both said, is that this is a part of a negotiation tactic that Trump has used. And ultimately what Trump is aiming for is an America first policy, one that has, I think, three key elements to it: trade, and trying to win, quote unquote, any trade deals, access to resources and lines of shipping, as well as maritime choke points, and then the overall great power competition. So the difference between the U.S. dealing with Greenland versus dealing with Denmark, likely it's going to be a combination of the two, even though Greenland is moving towards a more autonomous position, and Denmark is clearly trying to maintain some of its influence, but also honor, the sovereignty and the autonomous nature of Greenland. From the U.S. position, from the Trump position, it's trying to basically maximize the leverage in order to meet those three objectives that I said. Everything else, from the Trump perspective, is just details.
Yeah, one analyst described it as this: that the U.S. or Trump could help to underwrite Greenland's independence.
Yeah, there could certainly be some benefits, from the standpoint of Greenland there, and I think that's part of what the Prime Minister, in his comments is making, that this could actually be an opportunity. Yes, I agree with Raymond that this is, a sensitive position to be in, and I know that Taiwan has a lot of parallels here as well, but it's also a window of opportunity in order to enhance the political status, in order to, gain some much needed economic investment, but it will be a very difficult, road to maneuver, so to speak.
Yeah, and Greenland finds that perhaps it has a lot more leverage than it previously thought it had. Now, Taiwan has said it will diversify its energy sources and strengthen cooperation with the US. The country is responding to Trump's calls for the EU and other countries to purchase American energy exports over Russia's, and his threats to raise tariffs on countries that have a large trade deficit with the United States. Boomer, your organization, Asia-Pacific Peace Research Institute, as well as Eugene's New Lines Institute, you are discussing this issue of Taiwan's energy resilience. Can you tell us whether that particular move to buy more energy from the US would help to increase that resilience?
Well, so any diversifying of source for energy will help because, again, Taiwan's import of energy makes up like 97% of its energy, right? So not just purchasing from American, from other sources, this definitely will diversify and give more resilience to Taiwan's.
Are the routes of that supply, though, would they essentially be the same as the current, routes of supply for Taiwan sources?
So maybe this kind of plays into this jostling of the route for the Arctic, because the current route, all the nations know, like, hey, here's the choke points I can do. But then if you have new routes from that's coming up, then maybe that is an extra, like, safe for, or at least something trick out from your pocket that you can actually use.
Yeah, and we should mention the Bering Strait, which is another choke point, which is in the Arctic circle. But the fact that there are the two routes, one kind of China, Russia on one side, and the Western route would seem that it's sort of more or less balanced, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. Yes.
Eugene, what energy security challenges do you think Taiwan currently faces? I mean, what should be Taiwan's priority? What does it lack at the moment?
Right. So, yeah, as Boomer mentioned, Taiwan being an island, being dependent on almost 100% of its energy sources, there's a lot of vulnerabilities there. We've seen, for example, in recent years, especially the scope and the scale of Chinese military exercises has increased around Taiwan, sometimes with the explicit purpose, or at least the intended purpose of showing what a blockade scenario would look like. Even without geopolitical tensions, which there are many, the fact that Taiwan, is a powerhouse when it comes to the global semiconductor industry, that's a very energy-intensive industry, one that is projected to grow astronomically. So, having the access to, whether it's fossil fuels, renewable energy, a lot of different sources of energy from a lot of different actors, including the U.S., but certainly not limited to that, I think are some of the biggest challenges, and hopefully something that Taiwan can accomplish in the future.
Right, and Raymond, of course, China also imports a lot
Yeah.
of energy. How would you compare its vulnerabilities to Taiwan's?
Actually, I think the situation faced by China is very, very different from Taiwan because China has other routes to, for example, buying cheap Russian oil, which costs him a lot of blame from the European states because it's effectively helping Russia in its war effort. But Taiwan don't have that. Taiwan, we have to rely on the security of the openness of our port and the sea route. And that's a crucial part for the geopolitical calculation of this area.
And also, of course, China uses a lot still of coal-burning power generation facilities as well, which Taiwan
also
does.
China is a big player in the climate change regime and has more clouds behind their negotiation in that region as well.
In terms of the green energy
Yes,
revolution.
and Taiwan doesn't have that.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Eugene Chasovsky, Raymond Song, and Eric Boomer-Chan for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
2025 is calling. Louder, brighter, and bolder. From the roar of the crowds to the quiet moments of triumph. A year to experience sports at its finest. Grab your tickets, tune in, and cheer like never before. Every play counts. Every minute matters. Game on Taiwan.